Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I am your host, Benedikt, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, buddy?
Hello. I'm great, man. I scored a dream gig yesterday, and I can't even talk about it. But I want to mention that I scored it, but I'm not allowed to say what it is yet. We'll talk about it after the podcast, and then eventually I'll be able to fill everybody in on another episode. So, yeah, things are great.
You can't just do that.
I do it. Now they got to keep listening. They got to hear all the episodes after this until I'm allowed to say what it is.
All right. Yeah, that's, yeah. Okay.
It's really cool. It's like, it is for I could say it's an international show.
Oh, wow.
Say that. It is a show most people have heard of, I would say.
Crazy.
Very exciting.
Okay, now I'm going to be distracted for the rest of the episode because I keep thinking about that. But okay, yeah, I definitely want to hear more. That's cool. Yeah.
Other than that, requires massive amounts of physical fitness. That's the other clue.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's going to be very intense. I've got to start training immediately. And
really?
I feel like I already keep in good shape, but I got to level up for sure.
Dude, I need to know. Let's
just stop the podcast. Talk about this for a second.
Yeah. No, but can you at least talk about why it is, what it is that requires the fitness?
Yeah, there is some racing involved, and
racing is what, running or?
Yeah, there's challenges and stuff, but a lot of on-foot movement, and for the viewer, that looks like it's oh, that's intense for the person doing the challenges. Mm-hmm. But you got to remember that there's a camera person and a sound person carrying a lot of weight and gear doing the same thing to keep up with them. And that's me.
Awesome. Yep. How did you apply for, or get such, do they, I guess what I'm asking is, do they, obviously they look for people who are fit, right? Or it's going to be part of the application process or the vetting process.
Yeah. So 99% of this industry is word of mouth, and this wasn't really an exception, but it was because of my fitness. I mentioned to a camera guy that I was working with, Ryan Godard, great guy, that I'm into trail running, and he was like, "Oh, really?" And then he forwarded my info to the sound supervisor for the show, and that sound supervisor was called me up, kind of vetted me, and was like, "Oh, you're only," at that time when he phoned me, I was 30. Now I'm 31, but he was like, "You've got many years to go before your body breaks down." This is good. But yeah, he was deeply concerned about making sure that I could handle it, because apparently a lot of people can't, and they have to drop out, and they got to scramble to replace them and stuff. It's meant to be very intense.
What are you getting yourself into there, dude?
It's going to be, I feel like this is going to be a do it once and never do it again kind of gig.
It also sounds kind of fun and interesting, though. So it's
totally. Yeah. I'm so excited. Very excited.
Cool side effect of it is it's going to be, you're going to be more fit and healthy, even more so than you already are. So that's a good thing as well, I guess. So,
absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So how much time, the last question about this, how much time do you have to prepare for this, train for this?
I don't even know. I know that I think I have at least a month. I'm hoping for 2.
That's not too much either way.
Nope, it's not. Nope. I shouldn't be doing this podcast. I should be running.
Yeah, probably. Oh, damn. Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. Awesome. Yeah, I just keep thinking about this thing now. So let's get back to this episode. Before we dive in, I want to say that this episode is all around a question that we got from a listener, which is very cool. So I think... Can I say the name? Probably can, right? So Stefan, I'm just going to say the first name. Stefan emailed me saying that he loved the episodes that we have on editing, or sort of any episode where we talked about editing, but he wanted to know more because he needs more actionable, in-depth information, and he has some clear questions that he sent us. And I thought, well, let's just do an episode about that, answering these questions, because I think they are relevant for a lot of people. And that's what we're going to do. And before we dive into that, I want to tell you that because this episode is all about editing and about how to know when something needs editing and then how to actually do it. So this is hopefully a pretty actionable episode. Since this is the topic, we thought that it's a good idea that if you joined the Self-Recording Band community on Facebook, so you go to the selfrecordingband.com/community, and join us there, because there you can upload your rough mixes or your recordings and just ask people if they think it's tight enough or not. Or maybe other people with more experienced ears can spot things that you don't, or maybe more objective people with fresh ears can tell you whether or not something is really in time or in tune. So I think this could really help you speed up the whole process and speed up the whole learning process. I guess so. And I just think that's the best way to go about this, honestly. So there's one piece of advice right there. We're going to dive into this episode and give you more, but I think that getting feedback and asking people with more experienced ears will help you get better at editing and spotting problems pretty quickly. So if you go to the selfrecordingband.com/community, you can join us there, and I'm pretty sure that people will be happy to listen to your song and give you feedback.
Oh, absolutely. Positive.
Yeah. So to the actual episode, I'm going to say that this is something pretty common. So what this episode is going to be about, it's about knowing when something is actually in time or not, and knowing, like, being able to hear problems in your recordings and then knowing what to do about them. Because I'd say that this is pretty common. I see this all the time with people that I work with, like artists that I'm mixing for, that they send me stuff where, to me, something is clearly not in time or not in tune, but they just didn't catch that. They just couldn't hear that. And when I tell them, they most often can, but even then, sometimes they have a hard time. And that's just something that's, I think, pretty normal. And if I remember 10 years or so ago, I had a hard time spotting some of these things as well. So this is, I think, a pretty normal process that you get better at that over time. But maybe there are things that you can do to speed it up, and definitely there are things that we can tell you that you can do about those things once you've spotted them, once you know them. So to wrap it up, we're going to tell you how to spot problems, or we try to at least, how to spot problems, and then which techniques you can use to fix those.
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be a dive into editing, and it is a huge world, but I think part of this episode is going to be about dispelling the myth that you need to know everything to be able to do it. You really don't. And learning the basics is something that I've come to think everybody should do. If you're listening to this podcast, you're serious about recording your music, learning the basics of editing is going to be one of the most helpful tools you can have.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. And this episode is not going to be so much about the why, because we've talked about that. So Stefan even said in his emails that he understands that it's absolutely necessary in most cases. He just doesn't know how to actually do it. And especially, he says, on the fly while he has to do all these other things. So while he's also recording and playing and communicating with the other band members and all these things, he has a hard time doing some edits on the fly. And he'd love to hear us talk more in depth about how to know when something needs to be corrected and which techniques to use. So again, we're not talking about the why so much. We did that in another episode. And you want to find a link to that in the show notes if you want to go back to that episode. But this time it's more actionable and more about the how than the why. And I think it's interesting that he mentions the whole on the fly thing, because I think that it's a good idea to learn how to do that, because you will get better takes instantly. It will save you time later. It will make recording decisions easier. But at the same time, I understand that it's kind of difficult in the beginning, and that you have to learn it over time. And I can understand the overwhelm when you're new to everything, or you don't do it as often, and you have to engineer and produce and play and then also edit at the same time. So it's tough. And I'm gonna, before we start answering these questions, I'm just gonna read his actual questions so that we know what we're talking about. Part of it was what I already said. And then he said, it starts in the recording process when I have to decide whether we have a perfect take or not, or whether or not I can fix that later and comp it together or not. Like, so he doesn't really know if that's good enough and fixable, or if he should just do it again. Basically, that's part of the question. And then often he comes home, he says, he reopens the session, and then he asks himself why he missed so many of the mistakes or problems. Like, there's stuff in his recordings that he just didn't notice while he was recording, and then at home when he listens to it again, he notices all these things, and he's thinking that he should have solved those things right then and there at the source, and he just doesn't know why exactly he keeps missing these things and what to do about this, basically. And he's asking if there are like tricks or workflow hacks or something to reduce this problem and to make it easier to spot things on the fly.
Right.
So yeah, that's all part of this question.
Yeah. Well, so I think, like,
what are your initial thoughts here?
Yeah. First off, thank you for the question. super stoked on that. The first thing I think we could speak to is the trying to decide if it's good enough, if he can fix it later, or if he needs to redo it. And to me, the answer to that is what's faster. Keeping the workflow of the session moving as fast as possible, it, to me, is like such a huge focus, and the perks of keeping it moving are just like they're tangible. You know, you're not burning through your strings as much. You're keeping more energy. You're now keeping it fresh because you're not working on the same riff for hours and hours. You're moving on to the next riff. So if I know that I can just, like, they just played it a little ahead and I can just quickly like nudge the whole clip back real quick, just a couple buttons, and we're like, oh yeah, we're good. Why would I get them to replay it again, right? It's just like, oh no, you nailed it. You're just a little early. Couple buttons, they're good. Now that means in order for that workflow to exist and have those results, you do have to know enough about editing to make it happen on the spot, right? So again, that kind of goes back to learning the basics and at least getting some slip editing skills down. Keyword slip editing. If you don't know what that is, you're going to have to look it up because it's essential. But it all comes down to is like deciding if it's good enough is what's faster. It's like it has to sound, for me, it has to sound how I want it to sound before we move on. So either they nailed it or I can on the spot edit it to be how I want it to sound.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think you have to define a certain standard, a certain quality standard where you say like it's got to be that good or else we're not done here. Mm-hmm. So that's I totally agree. But then his question would probably be like, how do I know what the standard is? Like how right. Good is good enough? Like we have an episode on that. I think the actual title was like, how good is good enough? But like, so it's kind of hard because that's the part that probably comes with experience. I think your good enough now will not be your good enough in a couple of years, probably, hopefully. Absolutely. Because you're hearing it gets better and I don't know. Like that's the part that I'm struggling with this question, to give really actionable advice, because I don't really know a way to speed that up to be able to hear problems more quickly, because I really think it comes down to just doing a lot of work and listening a lot. Like even if you don't record other bands, but just comparing your recordings to songs you like and like doing that very, very often. And then maybe just experimenting with moving things back and forth and like listening to the difference and what feels better. Yeah. Like you just have to do that and analyze that and really listen for the differences, and then you'll learn. But it sounds like I feel sometimes like I remember for me it was vocal timing that I struggled with for a while. Like I thought a vocal take was very good, and then somebody pointed out that the vocal is late or early, and I'm like, no, I think that's good. And then I just tried it and moved it back a little or forth or whatever they told me. And then I was like, oh, you're totally right. Now it feels better. So I just had to try it, compare it, and then it clicked. And so over time, I learned to spot that immediately. In the beginning, I couldn't spot it. And then over time, then I was able to hear the difference. And then over time, I immediately noticed it. So
yes.
So the doing part, I think is what's crucial here. You just have to maybe get feedback, as we said in the beginning. Just ask somebody, and if they tell you something is late or early or feels weird, then just experiment and move it back and forth until you feel like now it's better, and then compare until you remember what the difference, and then you'll sort of learn why it's better now.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It really comes down to time and effort being put in, or effort being put in over time, and that equals experience, which is going to ultimately decide what your perspective is on good enough, and that is never stopped. Like I'm still that is a sliding scale, because I continue to edit stuff and figure out what is possible and what is totally fine to be left alone, especially across different genres. That's a whole nother skill to learn, is like what's genre appropriate, and you have to, your ear has to be able to adapt to those different genres if you're working multi-genre. If you're just doing your own band, that's actually kind of a huge advantage, because you're going to figure out that sweet spot sooner, I think. But there's no avoiding, unfortunately, this time over, or this effort over time thing. You have to put in the time and the effort. Now, when I was getting good at this stuff, I would actually, let's use vocal tuning as an example. I would try and put in probably too much time recording vocals because I hated vocal tuning.
Yeah.
And I thought I was good at it, and I think I am good at it, but it is very time consuming, and it's easy to be a perfectionist with vocal tuning. And so I was tried to get it right through tracking. And I was like, okay, does it need to be tuned? Like, would it actually help it? So I decided to print the song as it was without tuning, and then tune it and reprint it and compare A and B, section to section. And you can just, you could just flip back through playlists if you render the playlist of the tune one. And I still do that, like almost every time. I do my tuning pass, and then I go back and forth and kind of A, B sections out and make sure that I actually think what I did is serving the song. And that has led to an increased speed of making decisions while tuning, and certainly has led to parts of songs where I'm just like, oh, I don't need to touch that. That's totally hitting the bar of awesome. But it took experimenting. And honestly, if you're anything like me, your editing journey is going to go from not doing enough to doing way too much. And then you're going to slide back and keep kind of bouncing off the guide rails until you find the sweet spot. That's totally natural. It's going to be okay if you get it wrong. You have to understand that the performance dictates much more about what people are hearing than what you can do to it. So if you go a little too far, it's probably not going to ruin the song. But you want to, just do the best you can. That's really all you can do, and you are going to be getting better. You're playing the long game. I think this came up in the community, the Facebook community, just like last week or something. Somebody was kind of saying like, oh, I'm struggling with stopping learning and actually doing because I'm worried that it won't be good enough if I don't keep learning, right? It's like, it's always going to be better if I keep learning, but it's the doing and the sucking. You got to embrace the suck. I think somebody else said.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to embrace the suck.
Yeah, I exactly agree with everything you said right there. Yeah, totally. so yeah. I think that's pretty much it. And then, so I want to move on with the question because there's more to that and more actionables that we can probably give him. Okay, but before we move on, one more thing. He asked for workflow tricks there, maybe, or tips. So an example that he mentioned was if there's an obvious problem, not with the performance, but he mentioned like a squeaking chair or something. That he's for some reason didn't notice while he was recording, and then at home he noticed it, and then he wonders why he didn't catch that and why he didn't solve it at the source. So is there a way or sort of a process or a workflow or something you can do to reduce those kind of mistakes, like something to make sure that this doesn't happen? I guess my answer would be maybe have again, I'm a checklist guy, so maybe my answer would be be prepared and have a checklist for those sort of things. Like if something like that happened to you once, maybe just write it down, and then the next time you record, you check before you start recording. You check if there's any like noise in the room, if there's any. I used to do that for drum recordings a lot when there were things in the room that were rattling when we played the drums, and so I was checking for like, I don't know, radiators or stuff like that. Or like I would put blankets over things, or I would remove the extra snare that was lying around. I would put that in another room. Like I had to make these mistakes once, make a note, and then next time don't do these mistakes again. That's basically what I did. And if you have a sort of a checklist, I think, to avoid basic like technical problems like that would be my approach. But like if you're already in the session, is there anything you do, Malcolm, that helps you pay attention to those things, or a specific step in the process or anything?
I love that checklist idea. First off, that's great. I don't do that, and I think it's a really good idea. For me, there's a reason that I really like to do section by section recording, specifically with like acoustic instruments like guitars and stuff. Drums are pretty well the only thing I try to do full takes as much as I can. And it is because acoustic guitars, for being a great example, they're not very loud, and other noises can easily be as loud as them, including like tapping your foot, or the stool you're on squeaking, or just like accidentally strumming off and hitting the side of your guitar. Makes all sorts of weird, terrible noises. So by doing a little like, measure, like, okay, just the verse or just the first half of the verse kind of thing, it lets me kind of focus in more specifically on everything I'm hearing, rather than if it's a start to finish thing, it's really easy to overlook certain things. So like that little uber detailed approach kind of helps ensure that I'm like, okay, yeah, that was perfect. There was nothing wrong with that take. Let's do the next half of the verse now.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's a good rule of thumb in general. It's much easier to fix one part than having to fix the whole thing if you didn't notice it. So yeah, you're right. I remember having this conversation when we were talking about doing video content that we're eventually going to do for the Surf Recording Band, where you were like, I would rather break it down into chunks, just so in case something goes wrong, I only have to redo that section and not the whole video. So that's the same sort of thought there.
Yeah. It's totally true. If you're doing like a live, full pass of the song, and the first 3 quarters are good, and then there's a little squeak, you're probably just going to let it slide and let them finish the pass. And it's like, okay, we just wasted a minute because it's not actually good. There's that problem in the middle of it, but the rest felt good. So it's like a sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Now, he goes on to say that. We kind of answered that. He says, can you practice that even if you're not constantly recording other bands? Like, can you practice that with your own material? I think you can, for sure. Absolutely. And then he asks, like, what are you listening for when you edit? I think that's a good question. What are you listening for when you edit? Is it all about the transients? Is it about, like, what is it that you listen to determine whether something is early or late or spot on? And he says, like, can a picking pattern, for example, on an acoustic guitar or a strumming pattern or something, can that be edited in a good way at all? Or is that even possible? Because he has tried, but he says the sustain of the strings is like everywhere basically, and if he corrects the transients and moves them where he thinks they should be, then everything else kind of sounds weird. And it's also that some of the transients are not really so clear that it makes it easy for him to just cut and move them where they're supposed to be. So with like complex picking patterns on an acoustic guitar, that's what he's struggling with.
Yeah.
And even if he does it doesn't sound better. It sounds different, but not better than before. And parts of it got worse, other parts got better. So he's not really sure what he's doing there, and if it's doable at all. He also tried like time stretching, time shifting. He says that sounded interesting, but definitely not what I wanted.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's a good question. Like, what do you listen for as like part of the signal that tells you whether or not something is spot on?
Right. Yeah. So for me, rhythm, if we're talking about rhythm, and editing is often about rhythm, but not always. Yes, I think the transient is kind of what we use to perceive rhythm, and that's generally because drums are transient instruments and kind of dictate the rhythm of a song. Acoustic guitars are also very transient heavy. So yes, I think timing ultimately comes down to placing the transients accurately. When you're talking about the acoustic guitar and having trouble editing the complex picking patterns, unfortunately that's a hard truth, that editing picking patterns on acoustic guitars is incredibly unsuccessful in most cases because it's also a sustaining instrument in situations like that. So they're overlapping like crazy. It generally doesn't go very well. I would say that the acoustic guitar is one of the harder instruments to edit, and thus one of the harder instruments to record well. You really have to play it awesomely. Strumming patterns, much easier to work with. Picking patterns, very tricky.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's what I would have said. It's like the sad truth is that it's probably a matter of like practicing more or recording more takes or making it less complicated, anything like that. Because as you said, I find it to be one of the most challenging things to edit. But I would also say that it is, as you said, it is the transient that I'm listening for when it comes to rhythm. Maybe we should explain real quick, by the way, what a transient actually is for people who haven't heard that term. Maybe so it's the attack of the signal. It's the first impulse, basically, like when you pick a string, when you hit a drum, the first peak, sort of the first
spike,
quick snap impulse, whatever you want to call it. I've heard people call it the front of the signal. So that if you look at a waveform, the big spike in the beginning, that's the transient, and or like a little before that actually. So the very beginning of the signal, when you pick it or your finger hits the string. So that's what I would listen for, but it's incredibly difficult on a picking pattern on an acoustic guitar, definitely. Now the next question, and we can get back to that if we have more thoughts on that. But like the next question he has is,
I do have a thought.
Oh yeah, okay.
Just because you're describing what a transient is, I think this is a great example to describe soft and hard transients, so people can picture them more. Because everybody's looked at a waveform, and now you're trying to think, okay, what does the start of it look like? And that brings up the topic of hard transients and soft transients.
Mm-hmm.
So snare drum or a kick drum, very hard transients. It's a big impact and it spikes right away. It looks like that the front of it is like this big wall, and then it narrows down right after, which would be the sustain. Where an acoustic guitar isn't really like that usually.
Mm-hmm.
If you strum it, it's going to be a softer curve up to the peak and then start sustaining down. So that would be a soft transient. Now, worth mentioning is that depending on if it's a soft or hard transient, how we perceive the timing of that transient actually changes. So the more hard a transient is, the more immediate that peak is, the more quick we perceive it, and the more easy it is to just kind of throw that on a grid line and know that it's going to sound like it happened there. With an acoustic guitar or some electric guitars, that might not be the case. The front of it or the peak of it might not be what our ear thinks is the start of it. So you have to be careful and kind of learn those. And that's an experimentation thing. Editing electric guitars, sometimes it seems to work, moving the peak. Sometimes it's got to be earlier than that, when it's actually just like the pick hitting the string before the actual release of it.
Very good call. Like, glad you mentioned that. We definitely need to mention that. So yeah, it's actually the case with distorted guitars. It's actually when you look at the waveform and you see this big spike, most often, like with palm mutes, for example, and stuff that really needs to be in time. If we use that as a reference and put that on the grid, the guitar is likely to be early because, as you said, the pick attack is before that, and it's much easier to edit using, if you want to use a visual reference, it's much easier to edit using the DI as the visual reference and not the distorted track, because with the DI, the initial spike sort of is the pick attack, or it's more clear. With the acoustic, with the distorted amp sound, the pick attack is a tiny little blip before the big wall, and the big wall is already the amp sort of building up. And especially with like palm mutes, when there's a little low end energy, the biggest spike you see is not the pick attack. So the scratch, the thing that our ear needs to know whether something is in time or not, is actually before that. So a correct electric guitar chug part or something like that looks a little late on the grid most of the time. If you have a DI and a distorted guitar, you can use the DI as a visual reference because there you see it more clearly. If you only have the distorted signal, and that is true for like any other sort of low-end, heavy, or sort of amplified, manipulated signal that doesn't have a clear, or maybe saturated signal that doesn't have a clear transient to it. If you only have that, then maybe you can find a way to identify the part of it that our ears need to be able to hear where it has to be timing-wise. So what I'm trying to say is maybe you can just put an EQ on it and listen for the mid-range or the top-end attack, and just try to identify where the pick scratch is, the attack is. Or maybe you can, if it's a kick drum and it's very low and like a loose sort of big sort of thing, maybe you can filter it for a second and just listen to the beater attack until you really know where that is, and then you can edit it based on that. So I think it's good to know that our ears listen for the mid-range and top-end, so the click or snap or whatever transient a lot, and that the low end sometimes takes a while to build up, and so it looks late on the waveform. Like these are things that I think are important to know. It's the same thing as you described with the soft and hard transient on a guitar. I think if you like pick a string on an acoustic with your fingernail, it's going to be a pretty hard, clear transient. If you play it soft with your finger, it's probably going to be harder to tell visually where the transient exactly is, but there's still going to be the point where the string sort of snaps and gives you that attack. It's just not as obvious, and you just have to listen to learn how to listen for that and ignore the slower low end part of it, maybe, if that makes sense. Or in the case of saturation, the sort of saturated washy transient that results from that. So it's a matter of learning what the actual thing is that our ears need to identify whether or not that the timing is correct.
Totally. I love that you brought up that it's not just guitars, like it could be bass, it could be keys, it could be anything that you saturate on the way in. If you think you're going to need to edit, it might be worth grabbing a clean DI. I mean, I argue that it's always worth grabbing a clean DI. It's good practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, and then his next question was, and that's also a good one, and he says, do you go through a track like bar by bar, really analyzing every single hit, every single bar, like stopping, analyzing that, fixing it, and then you move on? Or do you just hit play, listen to the song, and you just wait until you hear something that's wrong and needs to be changed? Like, are you basically searching for mistakes analyzing everything, or are you just listening to the song and when something distracting comes up, you hit pause and then you correct it? Because he says, and that's a good one, that like really going in and zooming in and listening for all the details, he says, I assume that is pretty dangerous because the more you're searching for those things and the more you look at the details, the more details and mistakes, quote unquote mistakes, you will notice. So when you go hunting for these things, you're probably going to find them and you're probably going to find more than you need to. Yes. So he assumes this could be dangerous and he wonders like what the balance is there and how we navigate this. And I totally understand this question. It's a great one.
That's a great question. That's such a, I feel that in my bones. It's like trauma. So here's a good plan of attack for you. I think Stefan, right?
Yeah.
Stefan, here's a good plan of attack. It is to worry about it while you track it so you don't have to worry about it later. So while tracking, you can be caring too much, looking too small. And you know, like we've said, the experience is going to dictate what that, you're going to find a place where you're not like stressed out, you're looking so hard. But you know, care a lot about it being really clean on the way in. And then when you come back to do that review and like just be like, oh, okay, I should double check this and make sure it's all clean. You can come back and do that big overlook where you're not hunting for it. You're just listening to the song. You always want to be listening to the song when you click play to do a start to finish listen, because the song is way more important than any editing you can do. So the only time you should really be listening and looking for mistakes is when you are like literally only listening to that instrument as you record it. You know, the guitar is 10 decibels too loud as you track it because you want to make sure that you're digging in just right on each transient. That's when you can care about that stuff. But as soon as it's down, throw it back into the mix and listen to it as a mix.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. The only exception, and there's always an exception, the exception to that would be, and I don't think this is your genre, Stefan, so what Malcolm says is relevant for you, but maybe for other people in the audience, it highly, like, it depends on the genre, as you said, Malcolm. So if you are doing metal, modern metal, for example, or something that has to be like super accurate, you're going to have a hard time just listening to a palm mute chug part breakdown or something and like spotting which of the attacks is spot on and which is wrong. So in this case, I would really, these are the exceptions where I would go in really and take every single attack and put it where it's supposed to be, that it's in sync with the kick drum. Like these parts that are meant to be like almost robotic, like perfect down to the millisecond, basically. These are the exceptions because that's just the aesthetic of it and it has to be perfect. And I did just do it. I can even do it visually without listening to it at this point. Other than that, for every other genre, basically, I would absolutely do what you said, Malcolm, and listen to the song as a whole and make sure that it feels right, even if that means that a single attack doesn't look right or is maybe late or something. But if it feels right and if it's like the right emotion, the right impact, all of that, that is what really matters. And that is also, unfortunately, the part that takes time to learn because that is a very vague thing to teach someone, you know. But this is also what you said, Malcolm, when you were saying that in the beginning, you're doing not enough and then you're doing way too much. This is where I see a lot of people, when they learn how to edit, they start quantizing everything to the grid, even when it's not supposed to be there. And then they slowly learn how to,
relax.
How to relax a little bit. Exactly. That's really hard to teach, and it comes with experience. You just need to really feel the song and know whether or not it just feels right. And when in doubt, I would always say, like, just experiment. When you have the feeling that it could be late or early, or it feels a little rushed or whatever, just try. Like, if you think it feels a little rushed, just grab the part, move it back, and see if it's better. And then that way you'll learn. But I would also just learn to trust your intuition and your musical abilities. Sort of, you have a feeling for what your song is supposed to feel like, I think, and you have to learn to trust that in a way. It's a balance, you know. So
it's a total balance.
Yeah. But there are genres, that's what I wanted to say. There are genres where it just has to be completely spot on. And in those cases, there's no way around going through it like bar by bar, even like note by note sometimes, and just putting it on the grid.
Yes, been there. A lot of work, but it's the sound. I 100% agree. Yeah, it is fascinating. I think, again, going back to tracking and caring too much while you track, that's something I deeply relate to. I've left the studio feeling like I hate everything about a song, and then a week later I'm able to listen to it as a song again, and I'm like, this is really good. I'm doing that. I mixed a song yesterday and I'm like, damn, this sounds awesome. The feels there and stuff. And at the time I was deeply concerned about the tightness of the band, like deeply upset about it. And so I'm still learning this. Like I'm obviously, as a result of hearing the song yesterday, I'm caring way too much about tightness while tracking, because this is more than tight enough. It's really good. And this is a genre specific thing. Again, it's a sliding scale. But at the time, I think I was in like uber polished pop modern rock mode, and I needed to not be while I was tracking it. And I mean, it worked out, but I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if we got this one. And the band nailed it. They totally nailed it. So always learning, keep adapting.
Yeah, that was it. I hope, Stefan, that this was helpful, that this answered your question. Maybe one more actionable thing at the end, in case you're still worrying, like, yeah, but what do I actually do if once I've identified if it's late or early or whatever. So I think there's two things we should give you there. And you sort of have to look that up yourself, and you will be able to once you know what you have to look for. So the first thing is Malcolm, you mentioned it already, is slip editing. So slip editing is the basic technique that I would start with, which means you cut. The quick explanation would be you cut right before the transient. You don't cut into the transient. That's important. You don't want to cut away the pick attack or the stick attack. So you cut straight, like right before the transient starts. And then you move, and then you cut right before the next transient. So you cut out a transient or a whole part if that's what's late or early. Then you move the part or the bar, the hit or whatever you cut out, you move that to where it's supposed to be. And then you close the gaps that result from cutting and moving. And you do that by either like grabbing the event or region or whatever it's called in your DAW. You grab that, you drag it to the next one to close the gap, and then you do a crossfade. And you have to be careful to grab the right one because you don't want to get a double transient. And if that doesn't make sense to you right now, you just have to try it and you see what I mean. If you grab the wrong one, the transient will come up again and you'll have two of them. You don't want that. So you have to grab the right one to avoid the double transient.
But you just
cut it. You cut it out, move it where it's supposed to be, you close the gap, and then you do a crossfade so that you don't get a weird click. And you have to experiment with that a little bit, like how big, like how long the crossfade should be, where exactly to cut. You know, there's more to that, but that's the kind of easy part. You just have to practice, and you have to maybe watch a YouTube tutorial and then just do it a couple of times, and then you know exactly what I mean.
Yep.
But that's slip editing. That's what that is called. Just make sure you don't have weird gaps in your audio regions, and make sure you do crossfades, and make sure you don't get double transients and stuff like that.
I had an interesting question that pertains to this recently, and it was, why do we chop right before the transient and after? You know, like why is that the spot? And the answer is because that is the quietest part in audio you're going to find. Generally, you want to cut where there's no noise. And if it's a performance, there probably is still some noise, but the note before is fading out as much as it can, and the next note hasn't started. So that's why we're cutting it there.
Yep, that's why. And there's also a psychoacoustic effect. There's even a name for it that I don't remember right now. But the thing is, if you cut right before or after a transient, the louder, even if you get an artifact, even if you get a click or a small pop there, if the transient and the small artifact are very close together, our brain is only able to hear one of them. Like the loud transient will sort of make you not hear the other one, the other click. Like, right? It's totally fascinating. Like I've seen, there's YouTube videos on that where you can see an experiment where they have an totally audible click in there. If you isolate it, it's a clear click. Everybody can hear it. But if it's like a couple of milliseconds right before a snare hit, no matter what you do, you can't hear it. It's like not there because the snare hit covers that in a way. Even though the snare hit is after that, we still can't hear it. Like it's not there. So that's also part of it. Yeah, exactly. And if you do that right while a note is still sustaining, where it's not the quietest part, as you said, Malcolm, then you hear in the sustain, you're going to hear a slight dip or blob or something, you know, and that doesn't happen if you use the quietest part. And if there's a nearby loud transient, it's even better. So yeah, you're totally right. Cool. Thank you for that. That's important to know. And then the second technique that I want to leave you with is time stretching. We've also briefly brought it up in the episode, or Stefan, you even brought it up in your email. So time stretching means you don't cut and move and close the gap. You stretch or compress the audio, and we're not talking about dynamics compression, but time compression. So you make a note longer or shorter. So in that case, you don't have to close the gaps necessarily, because you're just changing the way. It's like weird to explain. You're just changing the waveform. And every DAW does it different. Sometimes you have to close the gap, but the difference is you're not leaving the audio as it is and just moving it to a different spot, you're changing the audio. You're making it longer or making it shorter. So a note that is not long enough can be stretched, and the note that's too long can be shortened. And that can be the solution in cases where slip editing just doesn't do it anymore. If the note is too far off and you slip edit, sometimes it's not possible to get close to a transient. Sometimes it's not possible to do it without getting a double transient. And in those cases, you have to try time stretching. But there's obviously also downsides to that. So that might introduce other artifacts depending on the source. And, you just have to try one of the two and see which works. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to pick your poison. Sometimes both of them leave artifacts and you have to decide which is like the less annoying one, or you just have to re-record it, So, yep. But these are the two techniques that I think you should look up. The first one is slip editing. The other one is time stretching. And you should learn how to do that in your DAW. And then you should experiment with both and just know that if one doesn't work, the other one probably works. And if none of them work, then you'll probably have to just record it again.
Yeah. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, it's a really good use of your time and effort and even money, if that's what it takes to learn some of these skills, like time stretching and slip editing. If you can get that roughly figured out so that you can correct something fairly quickly without causing damage, you're going to have a much better time in your DAW. You're going to feel much more at home there and less like you're in a hostile environment.
Yeah, totally. Talking time and money, because you just mentioned it. We didn't even say that in the episode, but we wanted to, and I think it's important. Maybe you shouldn't do it at all. Maybe you should just hire somebody to do the editing for you, a pro that is quick and who is experienced. And
I want to mention that I think I can speak for both of us. We don't offer this. This isn't something you can hire either of us for. So we're suggesting this entirely unbiased, and it's something we both hire people for.
Yeah, exactly.
I
offer. I have to be fair. I offer it, but I don't do it myself. Thomas does it, and we offer it for people who we work with, or I don't have it on my website or offer it as a service. We don't do editing only, but I offer it for people that I mix for who need editing. Here. I offer it, and also I had a coaching client recently, a very awesome band from Australia. They wanted to do it themselves, then they realized maybe we should just get it done and that you guys edit it, and then we did it, and they were stoked on the results. So we do it, but it's not my main gig. And Thomas is, I think at this point, Thomas is way better at it than I am because he does it all the time for me, and I haven't done it in a while, really. So
Totally.
I mean, I know how to do it, but he's probably quicker than I am.
Yeah.
And so that you should probably just hire somebody. And even if you want to do it in the future and you want to learn it, which is a skill you should learn, as we said, you should still hire somebody in the beginning just for the learning effect, because that way you have something you can compare your stuff to. You will know when it comes back, you will know, now that's what it sounds when it's in time, If the person you're hiring does a great job, you have a reference. You can compare to what you have now, and that will help you learn so much quicker. This will basically answer the whole question of what is tight enough. If you hire a good person and they do a great job, then you'll hear what tight enough means compared to what you had in the beginning.
I can't stress enough how much I would recommend recording your drums and sending them off to get edited, and then if you want to learn, try to do the rest from there. But you'll get these drum tracks back, and you're going to be like, damn, this changes everything. Recording to these is awesome. And now you've got this kind of foundation. We've talked about this 100 times, I think. Getting that foundation down to make the rest of the song on super great.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's it for this episode, Stefan. Hope that was helpful. And let me know if you have any follow-up questions to that. And again, go to the surfrecordingband.com/community, post your stuff there, get feedback. And maybe we can have a discussion there, because I think it's also a subjective thing, like what tight enough actually is. And I see kind of this trend right now where even in the heavier genres, people gravitate towards the little imperfections a little more again. So we kind of hit we were kind of over this peak of music being so perfect that people are now wanting the imperfections and the rawness a little bit more. Even in the metal genres, I see that trend. So yeah, this is probably a subjective thing and worth talking about and discussing, because it's a matter of taste in the end. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. So let's discuss.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.